Holler if you hear me, my freaks and geeks. TDKV here, coming at you with what was supposed to be the 13 days of Halloween, but I done goofed, and on the first day that would have been the 13 nights of Halloween, I recorded this and didn't realize that I didn't record the audio. So, whoopsie on me. But I don't know. By the time you're listening to this, I will have decided. But I am going to be doing a little series for the lead up to Halloween. Because as you guys have known who've been watching me for a good bit, Halloween is my favorite time of the year. Me and my wife got married on Halloween, and it's just something special to us. And so for the first episode of, I don't know what I'm going to name it, maybe we'll only do like the 7 days of Halloween or maybe the 10 days. But for this first episode, we're going to be talking about the Universal monsters and, everything about those classic monster movies, Frankenstein and Dracula and whatnot. Because these are the movies that kind of started my love for just horror and Halloween in general. I remember being a kid and getting, excited. I remember the first time, which one would it have been? I think Creature from the Black Lagoon is the first one I watched. But from that point forward, I've been a fan. And I remember specifically because these movies used to always play on AMC. The OG Fear Fests were all of these movies. And wouldn't it be like an all-day thing how it is now? It would be more like once a night. They would be just, I think they'd play like one, maybe two movies. And yeah. So, so without further ado, I'm just going to BS a little bit here. Kind of like an old podcast format, if you will. But Universal Monster Universe got started before before it got popular. The first couple of movies that came out were Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which would have came out, 1918, I think it was, or 1912 or something like that. They were silent movies. And, those did good for the time, I'm pretty sure that it got pretty good, critic reviews. Just something that, really, I guess, the main thing that gets brought up with that movie is that, actors for that time period did all of their own makeup and whatnot. And, so, it was just, prevalent, all the imperfections and whatnot. Couldn't think there for a second. But yeah, it seemed like it got good reviews. And then there was The Hunchback from Notre Dame that came out 1922, I think. And again, that one got pretty positive reviews for the most part. It's just those first two movies didn't really tick the scale on the whole making a lot of money for them. So, the horror, the monster movies that they were making they weren't being pushed out as much. And then the third one to the OG3 is The Phantom of the Opera, the original one. You might not have seen this movie, but you've probably have seen in some form or another in pop culture the scene where the Phantom gets revealed. It's that's one of the most pivotal moments in cinema history. I guess people were fainting in the theaters and stuff. And it's an alright movie for its time. I mean, for its time it was really good. Nowadays it doesn't really hold up. I mean, a lot of those, those three especially, don't really hold up anywhere near as much as anything from the 70s and onward. And then where things really, really started picking up was 1931. They made Dracula. And a little backstory behind how this movie got made. Dracula is a Bram Stoker novel. And Dracula was on Broadway, I guess. or there was like a play about it that was very successful. And actually, the very first vampire movie is a German made, I believe. It's either is German made or I know the director was German. It's called Nosferatu, and that was based off the Bram Stoker book. And what happened with that movie is it didn't come out initially whenever it was supposed to. I think that got made in 1922. I forgot what company made that, but the people who made that movie ended up getting sued by the people who owned the rights to the Dracula Bram Stoker book because they made that without like permission and everything. And then I guess Universal ended up buying the rights to Dracula, and then they made what you would now know as Dracula from 1931. And it's a classic in every way possible. I think most of the 9 times out of 10 whenever you think of the image of Dracula, it's this version. It was played by Bela Lugosi. I probably might be pronouncing his name wrong, but again, it's classic. It's not one of my favorites personally, but this movie was the very first big success of the monsters for Universal. And then because it became so successful, in the same year, they made Frankenstein. And I think everybody's heard of Frankenstein. And this is one of my favorites of the OG monster movies. It was sorry, Binks. But it starred Boris Karloff, and it just the classic tale of mad scientists trying to bring life to the dead, and just classic. And everything about the movie to me is just great. What's his face? I can't think of his name right now. Colin Clive. He was who played Henry Frankenstein, or it's Victor Frankenstein in the novel, but still though, classic in every sense of the word. And Boris Karloff, this is where he got his big start for being the monster acting legend that he is known for today. And then after that, because again, both of those were massive successes, they kind of started turning them out a little bit. In 1932, we got The Mummy. And again, Boris Karloff played in that. And the big inspiration for that movie was the unveiling of, or the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb. So, the big story with that was that, the people who found the tomb, most of the archaeologists, if not all of them, ended up dying. So they called it, the Curse of the Mummy. So, they kind of loosely based that movie off of just that whole thing happening in real life, which is pretty cool that, they did that. And then in 1933, The Invisible Man. And this is one of those ones that doesn't get talked about nearly as much as the other ones, but The Invisible Man's classic. It's about a scientist who experiments on himself and ended up making himself invisible. He ended up secluding himself in a lodge. I think he was in Alaska or something like that, and it just basically just going mad because I guess the chemicals that he was exposed to started making his brain making him go insane more or less. But yeah, Invisible Man is a classic one. And I also forgot to mention that I kind of forgot to mention this. I'll just mention it briefly. But in 1931, while they were making the first Dracula movie, they were also making a Spanish version of Dracula. So that way, you could, reach the European crowd, I guess. But that one's not nearly as legendary as the English version. And then in 1935, we got the first sequel of the MonsterVerse, which is Bride of Frankenstein. And this is regarded by many as one of the greatest sequels of all time. And it's kind of hard to argue with that. The whole premise of the movie's awesome. You know, it takes place literally right after it. I think Boris Karloff, everything he did good about Frankenstein, he just added to it and just made it even better. His portrayal of Frankenstein, showing a little bit of humanity, that, you know, he wasn't just truly like an actual vicious monster. You know, he did have a, you know, a human, like a good side to him in a sense. And then, you know, it ends up just being out that like, so like the premise of that one was that, you know, Henry Frankenstein was trying to not do this anymore. He was trying to like forget about it more or less. And then another, like some, like one of his old colleagues, I think, basically like ended up blackmailing him into making another monster. Like his like, honestly, you'd have to watch it, but Bride of Frankenstein's legendary. The next one after this, and this is where like for a little bit there, they kind of like, I don't want to say went down in quality, but they weren't really as good as those original, like what, how many of them were there? 5? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. The original 5 monster movies from Universal were all hits, classics. Here, not saying they're bad movies, they just can't really live up to those ones. And the first one's Werewolf of London, and everybody gets this one confused with the werewolf movie that Universal was known for, but Werewolf of London wasn't too bad. You know, I honestly, this is one I've only seen like maybe one time, but you know, it's the first werewolf movie in the U.S. and yeah, but it didn't do nearly as good with the critics or box office. I actually think did still do good, because I mean, there's a reason why they started cranking these movies out really fast. Because then 1936 was Dracula's Daughter, you know, the second sequel from the MonsterVerse, and that came out in 1936. And then there was a little bit of a hiatus there, because for 3 years they didn't make a MonsterVerse movie. And what ended up changing that was they re-released Dracula and Frankenstein, and those re-releases in the theater did stunning, made them a lot of money, and they were just like, you know what, there's a fan base behind this and people will go see these. So from 1939 to here, let's just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. They made 17 monster movies in a span of 7 years. They were making them. It was kind of like the MCU in a sense. It started with Son of Frankenstein in 1939. And then the Invisible Man Returns in 1940, The Mummy's Hand in 1940, The Invisible Woman in 1940. So they literally made 2 sequels to The Invisible Man in 1940 alone. Just crazy to me. And then in 1941, this is like the first like original one that kind of became like an instant hit for them, The Wolfman. This is the one that kind of like put werewolves like on like the popularity map. Lon Chaney played the werewolf in this, and this is a classic one. And then 1942, you had The Ghost of Frankenstein, Invisible Agent, and The Mummy's Tomb. They made a lot of mummy movies. That's probably of like the popular like 5 of the monsters. That's probably like my least favorite monster, the Mummy, but it has its place in history. I respect it. And then 1943 started a trend. So this is why 1943 was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. This is whenever they started like doing like collabs, if you will, or like mashup movies. And it's a little bit more on the cheesier side, but Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman's a great movie. The Phantom of the Opera remake was decent. I think the original one though is the one that's like remembered most throughout like just history and by everybody. And then you had Son of Dracula. Then in 1944 you had The Invisible Man's Revenge with also The Mummy's Ghost. Those came out less than a month apart, which is insane. And then 1945 had House of Frankenstein. And I think that's one like I think the house like they're like because there's the House of Frankenstein and the House of Dracula, and I'm pretty sure those are all like mashup movies. I think like House of Frankenstein had like Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll, and then I want to say the Wolfman too. But yeah, and like for like the 40s for the most part, there was a lot of like they're still making money, but like the quality kind of just like it because I mean we all know how sequels are by nature. They're not the best of quality, but still they're all right. And then 1948 started the Abbott and Costello movies. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and then 1951 Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. And then 1953 was Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You know, another thing too is that this is where the trend where they were pushing out too many monster movies way too soon together, and they weren't doing as well. So they kind of like were a little bit fewer and far between. And they really didn't get their next hit, and this is like basically their last really big hit, was in 1954, and this is my favorite one of all time. This is Creature from the Black Lagoon. You know, it stars Richard Carlson and Julia Adams. This is the story of, you know, the Gill Man. It's, you know, what I like about this movie is the whole realism to it. It's, I think the most realistic of all the MonsterVerse movies, or Universal monster movies, but we call them MonsterVerse. Just because, I mean, still to this day, we haven't discovered nearly all of the ocean. Like, I think 70% of it's still undiscovered or some type of math like that, but we don't know what's underneath that in the water. And I could realistically see something like this happen, like, you know, being like an actual thing, like, you know, a humanoid fish gillman thing. You know, I love the whole premise of this, and it's just, this is my favorite of them all. And from there, you know, they made The Revenge of the Creature a year later, and then Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy in 1955. And then the last movie in the Universal MonsterVerse was The Creature Walks Among Us. And by the way, I'm sorry, I've had a little bit of a cold. But yeah, these movies are all legendary just for the fact that these are the monsters that brought horror to mainstream. I mean, you could argue like King Kong was a thing in 1933, but beyond that, like monsters really weren't like a thing. Like Godzilla was 1954, so you know that came out the same year as Creature from the Black Lagoon. But again, these are the movies that inspired all the directors that, you know, making the horror movies that, you know, we know and love today, like, you know, the Halloween movies and like all those like slasher movies. I think those people who created those and were involved in the creation of them took their inspiration from these movies. Probably other things too, because like, I mean, they weren't the only horror movies that were being made then, but these are the classics and these are like the most known ones from that time period. But yeah, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. Those are probably the best ones. If you've never seen any of these, and if I could recommend any of them, those would be any of the ones that I would watch. Wolfman's the best werewolf movie from this time period. Also, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is classic in its own sense. I mean, seeing two monsters fight each other is pretty cool. But yeah, the Invisible Man, it's, again, like, it's like the whole idea, like, he makes himself invisible. He's walking around with like bandages around his face and everything, and secludes himself, and he's just going nuts. Mummy, I like that they made the Mummy because of real life events. That's pretty cool to me. But yes, so just figure, like I said, with it being Halloween time, figure out I'm gonna do some videos on like what has like inspired my love for horror and Halloween in general. And this is the first one because this is about as early as I could think of for where it would have started at. Because like I said, I remember AMC. This used to be all the movies they'd show, and then also it'd be like every Saturday night they would always, like, I forgot what they called it, but AMC used to do like the it was always the black and white movies, but it would be like the mole people, the giant ants or whatever it was called. There was a whole bunch of those like cheesy black and white like 40s and 50s movies. Those were always good too, and like I love those movies. You know what? Let me Google that real quick while I'm talking here. AMC Saturday night. Now. Saturday night black and white movies. I can't find anything. I'll add a comment to this if I'll add a comment to this once I find it, but AMC's on Saturday nights used to always show different black and white movies on Saturday nights because like the commercials and stuff would be like the old like propaganda, like just classic. And you gotta let me know in the comments if you remember, if you know what I'm talking about, if you remember that. But yeah, like I said, and I know this is different from most of my other videos. This is like a more of a podcast, I guess you could say. But yeah, so just let me know in the comments, have you ever seen any of these? If you haven't, like I said, all of them I think are worth watching at least once, because like once you watch like the first Dracula, the Frankenstein, Mummy, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, Wolfman, and Creature from the Black Lagoon, you'll at least want to watch all the other ones if you get into those. So, but that's where I would start at. I'd start from the beginning. Like I said, for the Frankenstein and Creature from the Black Lagoon are probably my two favorite ones. Bride of Frankenstein's really good too. That's probably like probably like a third. Invisible Man, Wolfman. I mean, Dracula's really good. It's not one of my favorites by any means, but the original Dracula movie's classic. But yeah, that's it for this video. I'll be doing these, like I said, I'll either do like the week leading up to Halloween, or I'll just post these randomly. Because like I had 13 nights planned out, and maybe I'll still do it and just, it won't be 13 nights. I'll just do 13 episodes of my 13 favorite things about horror, Halloween, something like that. But just remember, everybody, you're smart, you're kind, and you're capable. Please don't forget that. Until next episode, all my freaks and geeks, see ya.